feel like as an artist, nothing is more frustrating than seeing a little bit of success and then just watching everything go downwards and not understanding, one, why is it doing that? But probably even more frustrating is like, two, how can I even go about trying to fix it? And you just kind of feel helpless. And so I think that if you're looking at the long-term flow of your music career, you want it to feel like you're going on a staircase, right? And so you might not have huge steps every time, but you want to at least feel like you're incrementally growing and generating more customers, more subscribers, so that when you zoom out and say, oh, where was I 2 years ago? You're like, wow, I've 10x'd my number of subscribers in the last 2 years.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast, brought to you by Entrepreneur.io.
What's up, indies? Welcome back to Creative Juice. This is episode 234. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. I'm Jack McCarthy, your host. With me is my awesome co-host, Mr. Ed Isola. Ed, what's up, dude? I'm really excited about this topic. I'm curious to know what you think about it because we're going into kind of a critical release period for a lot of artists, and Q4 is upon us with a bunch of big sales kind of initiatives happening at IndieX, both on the release front and also just kind of on like general good sales practices. And I'm excited to talk with you about that today.
Dude, same. And it's funny because I feel like, we're end of the summer pretty much. And it feels like we're entering, like you said, the most important time and one of the busiest times. A lot of people are putting albums out typically September or October. So we're heading into that, plus all the different sales opportunities that are coming up. So I think this will be a really nice look at how everything ties together and how to make the most of it, and also how to set yourself up now so that you're doing things now that are going to play into your upcoming releases or your upcoming sales promos, both at the end of 2022 and then heading into 2023 as well.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic. I think it's a question that comes up a lot with artists of all sizes. I was actually talking a few months ago with a buddy of mine who he's the director of marketing at a label out of New York. And he was really stressed in the middle of like summer releases, really, really stressed out, kind of like, doing things as an almost one-man show, and was telling me just about how much running around he was having to do. And as we were talking about it, a thought crossed my mind about a conversation that I had had a few months prior with one of our IndieX agency clients, managers, about building upon releases and kind of looking to each release and the marketing that goes on before and after releases as things that should be exponentially building you up to the next thing that you do, so that instead of, kind of like roller coastering around, which is what we often see, especially when it comes to like e-commerce and stuff in monetization, when it comes to music, it gives you some consistency. And, really the types of things that we focus a lot on are like, between your big sales drop for your new album or whatever, you should be having consistent sales promotions. You should have a promotional calendar. You should be looking to turn fans into subscribers and subscribers into customers. And so, when you bookend a release and move it towards another release, the amount of people that you can reach out to and market to should really be bigger. I think that that's kind of where our heads went when it came to coming up with a cool kind of conversation to center that around, was around that concept.
Yeah. And I feel like as an artist, nothing is more frustrating than seeing a little bit of success and then just watching everything go downwards and not understanding, one, why is it doing that? But probably even more frustrating is like, two, how can I even go about trying to fix it? And you just kind of feel helpless. And so I think that if you're looking at the long-term flow of your music career, you want it to feel like you're going on a staircase, right? And so you might not have huge steps every time, but you want to at least feel like you're incrementally growing and generating more customers, more subscribers, so that when you zoom out and say, oh, where was I 2 years ago? You're like, wow, I've 10x'd my number of subscribers in the last 2 years. Like, that's how you want to look at it. And obviously you will have ups and downs along that journey, but you want to kind of big picture see an upward trend. And I think that's why it's so important today to talk about the fact that like, I would say releases and tours are the main things that drive like your upward narrative in terms of providing content to use for marketing and all that kind of stuff. And they should build on each other. And ideally, you understand how to use them, build on each other, and then down the road, like I said, zoom out and say, oh, look at this big picture. I've made X progress, and that's great.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like zooming out and looking at the consistent things that you've been doing over a year or 6 months or whatever it is, or 2 years, and zooming out and seeing like, okay, where was I a year ago? We did this for you for the 502s not too long ago, like a couple weeks ago. You and I were looking at, your email list growth metrics and being like, oh, wow, like they've like tripled in the last year and your customers have doubled. And looking at those numbers and being like, all right, we can essentially reverse engineer now. We know what we did to do that. Now let's do it again and keep that process going. And this is a lot of the kind of stuff when we talk with artists in like consultation and we work with artists at the agency. This is the kind of stuff that we really work towards, is like, if you have a release coming up or if you're in the middle of a release cycle, what are you doing to tee yourself up for the next one, for the next big thing that you're going to be doing? And I think this is something that a lot of artists and bands kind of lose track of accidentally. I think one of the biggest places that we see it being a risk is that, we see artists, big artists like Taylor Swift, who disappear for a little bit. And maybe Taylor Swift doesn't disappear all that much. I don't follow her career super closely, so maybe she doesn't disappear all that much. But using an artist of that size, a lot of artists will kind of disappear after a release for a bit, after the tour cycle has calmed down, and then they'll pop back up. And I think there's a danger in trying to emulate that if you're not an artist that has, a massive amount of public awareness around you, where like everyone's watching you from all angles and there's kind of an all-seeing eye around your life and your career, that if you disappear for too long, that momentum won't be there when you come back necessarily. It's a big risk to take.
Yeah, that's where I think as like artists that are coming up, and like you said, like you see like the Taylor Swift of the world, I feel like she does disappear and or try to leave the public eye musically at least, but her fans she's been doing it for so long that her fans are still in like their sub communities talking about her, so she doesn't leave their stream of consciousness. And I think that's an important kind of distinction, is that these bigger artists can take a break and can go, off camera, so to speak. But if people are still talking about them and they're in conversations and they're in stream of consciousness, they're not actually on a break in terms of like fans' minds. And so where someone like that can do that and see a little bit of a downtick, but still have fans excited when she comes back. Someone like, even myself, like the 502s, if we disappeared for 3 years, nobody would care if we came back around, and or we'd be starting over at scratch. You'd be like, okay, there's some people who need to be reactivated, but a lot of people have gone cold, and like now we need to get another video to go viral and try to spark kind of where we were. And unfortunately, I've watched a lot of bands that I like go down that path where they have a song that goes really well, and 3 years later, they're not a band anymore because they just didn't have the direction. And so that's where it's like, I feel like being consistent, and it's probably something I say a lot, but being consistent and at least having a plan of things to try. That's where it's like, and having a plan of things to try that are like intelligent guesses. You know what I mean? Not just like, oh, we had a song that works, so let me hire out a publicist. Like that kind of thing. But like an intelligent marketing guess for us, for example, would be like, hey, the very first fan finder we ever did, performance one take video, that worked really well for us. So then the guess was, let's try another performance take and this time do some ads behind it. And we've just kind of kept growing on top of that over the past 2 or 3 years and experimenting with performance videos, and some have gone well, some haven't gone well. But we know the framework we're working in, because it's like, here's this thing that worked for us. Let's work within that framework and try to do it. And that's a really good example of things as a staircase.
That's actually a really insightful example, I think, of like taking data-driven, calculated risks in your marketing and in your, just your overall calendar, really like your business, not just marketing. Like, it's like, okay, we know something works, so let's double down on that and do a little more of it and maybe put a little more effort and energy and budget and investment into it. And with the confidence that that will allow us to grow just that much more and kind of build us up for the next big thing that we're going to do. I want to, maybe this is controversial, maybe it's not, but I think there's a big risk, not only for like, you know, artists that are still growing and getting their footing, but I've even seen risk of like really big artists, bands, creatives, creators, you know, just people that are not just musicians, but even look to like YouTubers and influencers and stuff like that. I've seen even with people that we work with at the agency that have millions of subscribers and followers, if you start to disengage and not be active, not be, you know, creating and putting content out there or releasing music or whatever it might be, you can really like very, very rapidly realize the detriment to doing that. I mean, I've seen it even recently with an agency client who's been a little less consistent over the past few months. They've been in the process of really just being in like the creation den in the studio, but they haven't been active with their fans. And this is someone that has a massive following, and they've been really, really slow to be engaging with their fans and putting out content. And when we try to run sales, you know, it's getting to be more and more crickets every time we do it because there's less going on. There's less awareness. There's less reason for fans to cling on to and be excited about what you're doing. And we're even seeing it right now in the middle of a kind of pseudo like digital launch that we're doing, that it's been a bit more of an uphill battle to get these fans back in and engaged just from a few months of, you know, being tapped out. And this is someone that like people know who they are. You know, I'm not going to name names here, but it's a creative, an artist that really, you know, has made a name for themselves. And so I think there is risk. Like, are they superstar Taylor Swift level? No. And, you know, I think, but they're, you know, much bigger than, as far as an audience goes, much bigger than you and I. And so I think that that's an interesting point. Like, it's definitely not a black and white, like small artist, big artist thing. There can be pretty big losses unless you are a superstar figure that's really in the public eye all the time, like Taylor Swift or anybody, you know, that's kind of in like the top 40 world, I would say.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting here is that what you're kind of explaining is something that I feel like a lot of artists do. And this is my takeaway, I think, from the episode so far, is like, as an artist, you're going to go through your creation periods, and there's going to be periods where, hey, my new album's out, or my new YouTube series, or whatever, like this thing that's big and flashy and can bring people in, that's out. That's always going to be a peak for you. And then once you peak, you're going to kind of start to see probably a downward trend in terms of engagement. I mean, even the biggest artists see that on release day, their streams go way up and then they start to tailor out. But what I think the takeaway here is like, you have to have a system for as things start to go down, and not just say, hey, I'm going into the den, I'll see you in 6 months. That's something that we're working on currently, is like, hey, believe it or not, like TikTok has become like a very fertile area for the 502s. And we need more help there. Like, me just creating videos on my iPhone isn't enough. We need better content. And that feeds all these different parts of our business, and we can use it for advertising and that kind of stuff. But I kind of have realized, hey, we need to be more consistent there. So now that we have a little budget, let's go out and find somebody. But my comment is like, I've identified that is a weakness in our business and a system that we need to get in place to allow like our community to stay engaged and keep growing, so that when we release an EP later this year, and when we release a full length, our third album at the start of next year, people are still there that care. And even the bare minimum, which is me making videos on TikTok, that's still keeping people somewhat engaged. It's not giving us a spike up, which I think is dependent on quality. But that's just like where, as you get more comfortable with your business and more in the weeds, you have to start to understand, what are my systems? What's working for me? we're going to have Jonah on in a few weeks time, kind of talking about organization type stuff. But I think it was either him or Cirque, or maybe you, Jack. Somebody at one point said, your business is as good as the systems you have in place. As the artist, you don't want to have to be doing everything. You want to start to put things into a system so that, hey, I'm going into the den to record and I'll see you in 6 months turns into, hey, I'm going into the den to record and like, come with me. I've got my friend here who's going to be posting behind the scenes content the entire step of the way. And that's not an easy thing to get in place, but understanding, and that's a very, like, I would say that's a more complex example of a system, but my underlying comment is like, look at your business and say, hey, where are the weak points right now? And where are the points that I think could give me a lot of upside? And then work to get that formalized and streamlined.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. And I think we can probably dive a little bit deeper. That was like a perfect segue, honestly, into like, we've talked very theoretical up to this point of like, you know that you want to be growing between releases and you know that you want to have like more people to connect with, more fans to reach, you know, with every release or major event, milestone, whatever you want to call it in your career. Now, how do you go about doing that? I think you said it well, like having the systems in place to do that and knowing exactly what you're going to be working towards is the way. That is the way to do it. Now, like systems might be a scary word, right? I think systems is probably a scary word for some people because they probably think like, oh, does that mean it all needs to be automated? Like, how do I do that? Does that mean it needs to be perfectly scalable? Like, you know, the red lights and the sirens immediately go off when you say like, have systems in place. And it's like, does that mean spreadsheets and software and all sorts of stuff? But like, let's boil it down to like just the marketing elements here. Cause I think you raised a really good point, Ed, in talking about TikTok and knowing that, you know, for you guys, that's an engine for getting new fans, getting new people listening to you through your content. But I think it also, it goes even deeper into like, you guys have systems in place for, you know, a sales calendar, a promotional calendar is a system, right? And you know that that system then feeds your marketing. And you know, like, okay, we're going to have this many sales promotions throughout a year where we're looking to turn people who have not bought from us into customers for the first time, or get someone who has bought from us to buy again so that they remember and know, like, we're out here offering them cool stuff. You want to have systems in place for getting the fans that are in your world and kind of hanging around and turning into subscribers for the first time, getting on your email list, getting on your text list. Those are the systems that you want to be having where, you know, you're kind of looking at growth all across your ecosystem. So then you could say like, here, I think this is a really easy sort of way to analyze. Like, look at your last release, you know, the last album that you put out. How many fans did you have on your list that you could email at that release point? How many? Ask yourself that. Ask yourself how many customers you had that you could directly make a sales offer to again for this record. Project ahead to your next release and decide, what kind of goal do I want to set for myself? How many more people do I want to have in those channels? And then that's the stuff that you want to be looking towards. I know you had we were just talking today and last week too about one of our agency clients who is teeing up a release, I think at the beginning of next year, you said, and they've been focusing on customer creation through free plus shipping and handling funnel of an old record, but now they're pivoting a little bit to like, okay, we need to like rapid fire kind of go through and ramp up our subscriber growth. So we're going to look towards permission offers and bribes again, because free plus shipping and handling is getting a little bit expensive and we're not getting enough leads.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a really good example of like, hey, you don't have to force things when it comes to marketing. Like if you do it for enough time and you take the steps of like understanding the processes and the resources available to you in terms of strategies, you can kind of pivot and adjust. And I know we've talked about pivoting before, but this example that Jack's talking about, I mean, I know that he listens to the podcast, so he'll probably hear this and think it's cool he's used as an example. But essentially, yes, we were running free plus shipping and handling, and it was on the back of like we want to create a bunch of customers and we want to create a bunch of subscribers. And so when we started free plus shipping and handling a year ago, we were running it. It was about break even. Cost per subscriber was like maybe $1 or something. It was really affordable, and there was customers coming in, and the whole thing was break even. So it was running great. And then you hit the holidays and it kind of goes down. And post holiday, it just never got back to the same level, despite a bunch of tweaking and trying and stuff like that. And we tried to kind of optimize it and fix it and update it for, several months, I would say, and just never really quite got back to the same level where it was at 1x, maybe it's at like 0.7 now. So it's still doing fine. But then we made some tech switches and it kind of closed off the legality of a couple things of like the platform they were using was allowing people to join their email provider, whether or not they opt in to get emails, like subscribe to the emails. We switched over to Shopify, you have to check the box. And so then that kind of drastically impacted their subscriber count from free plus shipping and handling, which was one, they shouldn't have been getting those emails in the first place. But now that they made the switch, they weren't getting those emails. And so it went from great free plus shipping and handling to holidays kind of put it down. And then it was expensive. The cost per email was expensive. And so we were talking one day at demo and it was kind of like, well, what is the goal, right? Like, what's your guys' goal? And a lot of times I find if you get confused or you get caught up in the weeds or stressed about, I'm not making progress, I don't know what I'm doing, like stop and ask yourself, like, what's your goal? And that's probably going to tell you what you should work on. And if you go into Indie Pro or the trainings, what's your goal will typically directly connect with one of the steps of the buddy system. And then there's a training that relates to that. So the question was, what's your goal? Like, what are you guys doing? And it was like, well, we're working on an album and we're going to put the album out probably at the start of next year, in the spring. So it's 7 to 9 months away. And all I really care about right now is getting subscribers onto our list who are engaged with us at the best cost. And so then that was kind of like, okay, well, that's your goal. We're doing the wrong thing. Like, it's fine we are doing this, but if you actually are just concerned about subscribers who are putting their hand up, saying, I want to be here, opening emails, like Jack said, we need to switch. We need to go for leads. We need to get a better opt-in magnet. And so we made that switch a couple weeks ago. And so far it's off to a great start. The cost per subscriber has been cut in half and we're pulling in like double the number of subscribers at the same ad spend and it's going well. Inevitably, that will probably also tailor off at some point and we'll have to readjust. But like, I think that the moral here really is like, we had the conversations of like, what's your goal? Oh, that's your goal. Here's a system that matches up with it. In this instance, the system was literally just an opt-in page with a 5 email series and some ads. Let's do that. And let's get you guys subscribers so that in this quote unquote down period, you're growing. And then when your album comes out early next year, now you've got 5,000 people on your list instead of 2,500 people. They were willing to have those conversations and make sure like, hey, this is what's the best thing to do. Let's do that. Not, oh, I've already put so much in here, like sunken cost type idea, right? Like I've already put so much into free plus shipping and handling. I can't just kill it. It's like, well, you can just kill it. And like, maybe we'll start it back up in the future.
That's such a good story that kind of exemplifies exactly what we're talking about here is like, you set your goal for growth, knowing that you're going to be having wins throughout the year, but like also knowing like, I want to have double the amount of subscribers, for example, at my next release as I did at my previous one. And you know that because you want to have more people that you can reach out to, have more at-bats for selling your record, have more at-bats for selling your merch, whatever it is that you're dropping. So your goal throughout the year, maybe for subscriber growth, is moving towards that. And then like you said, Ed, like you can pull from different strategies in your toolkit. That's why you should have, a few different ideas always sort of in your back pocket that you can be working towards and not just relying on one thing so that if it peters out and can't be used anymore, it's not working well, you've got something to pivot to. I've seen the same thing, like free plus shipping and handling funnels that kind of dry up and the offer gets stale. And then you need to work towards something else. And instead of just abandoning the goal of getting subscribers altogether, you might move towards, okay, I'm going to get subscribers through a different kind of offer. And then I'm going to monetize them on the back end, or I'm going to monetize them with a tripwire, or I'm going to try to start, sales promotions every week or something like that. I mean, really getting creative about how you go through the process, but it's always kind of in service of the bigger goals that you reverse engineered. And that, I think, brings back to the big idea of like, what are you doing in your marketing to set up everything that you do, from a tentpole kind of event or a milestone sort of system as being better than the next. And I think that's a really helpful way to think about music marketing, especially for like indies that are very used to the music industry way of operating, very kind of traditional music industry of like, you kind of make your wins at release time and at touring time, and everything else in between is like sort of a valley. You can pull out the wins to help you kind of consistently grow by focusing in that way, by seeing like, okay, I'm going to set my goals so that instead of there being a valley after my release, like, sure, things will dip down, but like I'm always going to be incrementally growing towards the next thing. I think that that's really, really important.
Yeah, it really is. And this is actually kind of a funny realization I just had. It's like thinking about what comes next. Looking back, what I feel like I just realized how things have always run, both for myself and for clients, is like there's this problem or this lack of something in place. So whether that's I need top of funnel, or I need permission or whatever, like, it's like, I need this thing. So I'm going to put all my effort into getting the best possible album launch together. And I'm going to launch it. I put a lot of work into it. It's going to go great. That's the peak we were talking about. And then that thing, you put all this work into it, all this planning, all this work, and it works for a while, but then inevitably it gets fatigued and it kind of tapers out. But then you look and say, well, I just did this whole big permission offer and it's tapered out now. What do I do? But it's like you put this whole effort towards this thing and now you have all these people at the end of that portion. And it's like, well, now the next thing I need to do is make them an offer. And so it's really interesting to me to think about the fact that like, as you're making these efforts, you're probably going to have a big effort. And then that's going to be like the conclusion the first time of that phase, and then you'll go on to the next phase of the buddy system. And I don't know, it's just interesting because I think that demonstrates how it builds, because it's like, yeah, you put all this in, you did this thing, you got subscribers, now make them customers, and then those people are customers. Like now you want to repeat the process, and so like you're always kind of like building, testing, things are working, they taper off, build, test, things are working, they taper off until you get the entire system in place.
Dude, that's such a good point. That reminds me of a story too. We have a client at IndieX who is about a year and a half through maybe 2 years at this point, a year and a half or 2 years through a release cycle where they generated a ton of new customers, people coming in and buying for the very first time. Massive, massive growth for their business. And I just did an audit for them last week. And one of the things we looked at is like, okay, like, we're starting to see kind of like the tapering off growth of these offers that happened during this promotional cycle, basically this release cycle. And we're starting to see like the consistency of that finally starting to die down a bit. And it's like, okay, well, like what's next? What can we learn from what we just did? And, we did like a customer audit basically to see like, all right, of those people that bought during that release cycle, how many of them have bought again? And there was about 26,000 people, I think it was, that became a customer for the very first time in this release cycle that haven't bought from them again yet. So what does that say to us? It's like, okay, well, like to tee up the next big thing, we need to make sure that those people are buying a second time. So where are we going to focus our efforts? We're going to focus our efforts on trying to make more offers to that segment of fans so that the next time we do a big release, they're really excited about picking it up because they've gotten extra value, more value. They've, been continually engaged with you as a business since that first thing that happened for them. I think that that's kind of another, and it's exactly like you said, it was moving on to like the next stage of the buddy system. Like those people are all hanging out in first time customer land at affirmation. And now it's like, okay, we need to get them to buy again. Like, let's come up with strategies to do that. Let's figure out how to sell to them. What are we going to sell to them? How does it relate to the first thing that they bought? It's exactly that, rather than trying to like pull more water from the stone, so to speak. I think that that's like a really, really insightful way to look at the buddy system as well.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think that really demonstrates very well, like how things should build on each other. And hopefully like gives you guys some context for the fact that like what you're doing right now doesn't exist in a silo. and it doesn't exist in like even an album release. Hey, I'm putting this album out and that's it. Like you want to view your career with a longevity perspective versus, that sounds like an official phrase, longevity perspective. It's not, but it should be.
Trademark.
But, yeah, trademark. But you want to look at it as like, oh, I've got the rest of my life to do this, and therefore this album sets up the next thing because, or like post-album sales offer sets up the next thing because, and that's a really good point. And I even think you said something similar to Jack about like 502s was like, hey, we looked at your list and you've got this group of people who are great subscribers and customers, but like you have this other pool of people who haven't bought in a while. Like, let's work to make them an offer. And it's like, yeah, we should do that. And the great thing is it's natural to let things certain things fall by the wayside, I would say. Like we're working on top of funnel, we're working on permission offers, we're working on making sales offers, we're building a new website, new music, all these things. That's why I think it's really important in this process of like how to build upon each release, setting aside every 3 months, even that is like more than enough time. Do a quick little audit of your ecosystem, because I think that's how you guys identified that, missing piece was like, hey, we've got all these things working, but like we did this audit at the end of the quarter and y'all aren't making offers to this portion of people, which is, 8,000 people. And like, we need to make them a dedicated offer. And it's like, yes, we should do that. And I'm sure we'll do an audit at the end of the year and we'll see something else that kind of got glossed over. But like that happens. It's just taking the time to identify it and fix it.
Yeah, well said. And I think that this is something that if you're an artist manager or working with an artist on their team, in my opinion, some of the best artist managers that we worked with at the agency have been the ones that have been focused on the continuing sort of upward trajectory of growth, like you were saying, Ed, like having those upward growth trends and not just having like a release be like, a quick revenue hit and then it goes away. Like trying to look for every opportunity for your releases to build upon themselves, for your marketing to fuel future releases, for all of your efforts to kind of be driving you forward. And I'm not going to name anybody because I don't want to make them blush, but there's some really, really smart artist managers out there that I've had the pleasure of working with at the agency that are really, really tuned in with that idea. And I think that it's so important. So if you happen to be working on an artist team and you're not an artist yourself and you're, thinking about the marketing aspect, this is something that I think is like critically missing in a lot of conversations around releases and launches and ongoing marketing. And that way you don't get stuck in just doing top of funnel all the time and, just trying to get one song to be heard by as many people as possible and just, continuing to run ads and hoping that somehow that will unlock some perfect key to growth for you on one song and just trying to again, pull water from a stone. I think that it's really, really important to kind of look at the bigger picture of where every effort that you're taking is taking you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually a really good point too, is like, you don't want to be, rather, you probably won't have a long career if you're a one-hit wonder and or you're only ever driving one song. Like there's a reason that this entire episode is about how to build upon each release, because what makes artists connect is consistency in content and music and posting. And that's where the whole system thing comes into place. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of Nick D is his name.
Yeah. TikTok dude. Love his stuff.
Yeah, he's great. But he's like an independent artist, I'm pretty sure. And as far as I can tell, he kills it on streaming, but that dude is awesome at content creation and he has good music, right? Like his music's catchy, but we've had clients at IndieX that have similar pop catchy music. But what Nick D does that's totally different, in my opinion, is like he makes high quality content. You can tell that he took the time to learn how to do video editing and framing and all that kind of stuff. And then he posts consistently with his songs, and like he's got videos coming out. And just these are just like TikTok videos, by the way. It's not like he's putting out full music videos that I can see. But he posts consistently about this thing. And he's kind of like, he figured out what his thing is in terms of his colors, his quality of content, that kind of stuff that relates. He figured out his thing, and now he's doing it repeatedly. And if you have Spotify for Artists and you Google his name, you can see like he had a song go viral, it went down, and then it feels like he figured out like, hey, this is what connects with my specific audience. So I'm not saying you guys should go to his page and copy him, because it's not going to work for you the same way. But like, it's doubling down on that idea of, if you find something that works for you, do that a lot, because I think that's what he kind of did. And now his streams have just gone like upward trajectory. And so he's a really great example of building on each release, but also using the same system and the same content ideas to say, here's my baseline. Let me make this kind of unique for this release by doing A, B, or C, and let's put it out. Let's do some posts, and then let's do it again. And like, very similar, I think, to my philosophy, which is like, get a system, make good content, put it out. If it's that good and that high quality, both the music and the content, eventually something's going to connect, whether that's on the ad front or the TikTok front, wherever it is. That's kind of I think a really good example of like top of funnel compiling, compounding interest, whatever the right phrase is. Like, find what works for you, find your thing. You're not gonna be able to rip somebody off, but then do it repeatedly in slightly varying ways.
Yeah, I think you said it well. Like, it's the compounding efforts eventually get you the momentum that you want to get. You just have to be willing to do the work and find your thing. And I think that applies to everything that you're doing in your marketing. So yeah, I think that's a great point, Ed, like with regards to top of funnel, because we were talking a lot about like subscriber growth and how to make sure you can contact more people than your last release and all that stuff. But this definitely does apply to just getting people aware of you for the first time too. I think that that's really, really well said. Like it applies to sort of every piece of your fan customer journey, every piece of your buddy system, not just the deeper engagements, not just creating customers or making money. It applies to every step of it. Find your thing, do more of it, do the boring work. Like you said on last week's episode, you said like, do more of the boring work. And I thought that was really well said.
Yeah. Well, I don't remember saying that, but yeah, good insight from me.
I love it. Well, hopefully this helps you guys kind of consider what goals you might have for your upcoming releases, and more specifically, like what micro goals might make up those bigger goals, and what you might need to start putting in place to get there, especially as we're going into Q4. And before we know it, we're going to be talking about Black Friday sales and all that good stuff. And so there's a lot of work to do to get into really maximizing what you can be doing to engage with your fan base, to pull out some big wins in your music career in the next few months. So hopefully you guys take some of the ideas that we talked about in this episode and apply them for yourselves. And I would love to hear more about it. So if you dig this kind of content and you guys want to hear us talk more about this kind of stuff, or you just want to share some of your wins that you might have gotten from something we talked about on the show, please feel free to leave us a review. It really helps us to get the word out there and lets us know that you guys dig what we're doing. So if you can do that for us, that would be super, super amazing. As always, love bringing as much music marketing inspo to you guys as we can on this show. And looking forward to catching you guys next week on Creative Juice. Peace out, ladies.
Can y'all really feel the peace?